Dzień dobry Państwu, witam Państwa Poranek u Hieronima. Poranek bardzo specjalny, bo jak żeby inaczej, skoro nasz dzisiejszy gość także bardzo specjalny. Nie jest specjalnym gościem w Lublinie, bo tu bywał już wielokrotnie, ale po raz pierwszy jest osobiście w naszej bibliotece, bo pośrednio myślę, że niektórzy z Państwa mogli go gościć w swoich domach, chociażby dzięki tej książce. Tak, proszę Państwa, naszym gościem jest dziś Irving Finkel. Dzień dobry.
Dzień dobry.
Witamy serdecznie. Dla tych z Państwa, którzy jeszcze nie mogą złapać oddechu i nie są pewni, czy to właśnie ten Irving Finkel. Tak, proszę Państwa, brytyjski filolog i asyriolog, asystent kuratora na Wydziale Bliskiego Wschodu w British Museum. Specjalizuje się w tekstach zachowanych na glinianych tabliczkach ze starożytnej Mezopotamii, a pod jego pieczą pozostaje blisko 130 000 tabliczek z pismem klinowym. Wiele lat temu Andrzej Molik, pisząc o naszym dzisiejszym gościu, nazwał go czarodziejem z British Museum. Czarodziejem, spotkanie, z którym można porównać chyba tylko do wędrówki wehikułem czasu. I właśnie do takiej wędrówki będziemy chcieli Państwa dzisiaj zaprosić i udowodnić. To znaczy udowodni Państwu to nasz dzisiejszy gość, bo ja miałam okazję i przyjemność już z nim rozmawiać i wiem doskonale, że taka wędrówka jest możliwa niezależnie od czasu i miejsca, w których się znajdujemy. Taka wędrówka jest możliwa chociażby w momencie, kiedy wezmą Państwo do rąk książkę naszego dzisiejszego gościa. Ta strona jeszcze pusta, ale zaraz po naszym programie poprosimy naszego gościa o specjalną dedykację dla Państwa, o życzenia dla każdego, kto będzie chciał odbyć wędrówkę dzięki niezwykłym kartom tej właśnie książki. A póki co zapraszam Państwa w obiecaną podróż. Przewodnikiem, niezwykłym przewodnikiem, specjalnym przewodnikiem będzie dla Państwa Irving Finkel.
Well, the Great Diary Project, people often find themselves inconvenienced or life is awkward and they say something like, well, somebody really ought to fix this door, somebody really ought to do this or do that, and you never do it yourself. Well, one day I had the idea that somebody ought to start a national repository, a national institution home for diaries which are all over the British Isles, in houses, sometimes still being written, sometimes no longer being written, to rescue them and bring them together in one place safely, again, with the future in mind, because otherwise, when you have a family of diarists and your great aunt dies, and in the dressing table you find a whole load of, well, I can't read those, they're private, and they get thrown away immediately. They get burned, put in the dustbin, put in a skip, something like that. People don't touch them. And they're scared either that they're full of incriminating, wicked things like sex, or that they discover that they really owe somebody money from the last 150 years, or whatever it is, that they won't have anything to do with them. And I became aware by accident how common this is, because England is a diary-keeping country. And it goes back, if you read English novels, the role of the diary is very important in the plot as a way of advancing information about a character. And the diaries are all over the place. And they started in about 1600. And by 1800, 1900, and then into the 20th century, people all over the country were keeping diaries of different kinds. And the thing is this, most diaries are about this big. And most cuneiform tablets are about this big. And I work with documents of that size made of clay, which are sometimes 4,000 years old or more, which have in them the details of people's real daily lives. This is what I work with from 3000, 2000, 1000 BC up until the 1st century AD. We have all these documents. They would fill this room floor to ceiling if we had them all here. There are so many of them. And each one of these tablets, like this, sometimes there's an archive, sometimes there's a lot of letters, sometimes there's one, but you have to squeeze them like this to get all the information that you can out of the writing, like a sponge. Well, diaries seem to me very similar because they are the same size. Sometimes you get a whole run, which is marvellous, sometimes only one, and sometimes one diary, you read it, and it's full of amazing material. And you never find out what happens because come the end of December, that's it. And you have to, again, squeeze that. So when somebody writes something, you have to think, what did they mean? What was that a reference to? What is it? And I discovered this, that all diaries are interesting. Not in a nosy way that you want to spy on people, because the people are usually long dead. There's no pleasure in being kind of nosy. It is much more to find out about their lives and what they thought. And I'm not interested at all in diaries written by politicians, not a single one, or film stars, or people like that, because people like that write their diaries in order to publish them later. It's a very useful way when you've lost your job as a minister in the government to get some money back by publishing your diaries. So 3/4 of what's written in them is untrue. Possibly 7/8 is untrue. This is rubbish. What I am interested in is the kind of diary kept by people in normal families. So it's slightly more women than men, but not necessarily. And sometimes you have diary families where the grandmother writes one and then her daughter, and there's a long continuum. And sometimes one person gets the idea and they write. But the thing is this, these marvellous documents, written again by thinking persons, recording material, are very vulnerable to being destroyed. Very vulnerable, sometimes within weeks of somebody dying. So I started this project with the idea like this. There was a special librarian there, and the librarian I persuaded to see things like me, because most librarians would say, well, we don't want them if they're not interesting, or we don't want them if there's not much written, or we don't want them if they're written in Scotland. I mean, what's that got to do with us? So we stamped on this idea, and I got this librarian against the wall with a pistol against his head. And I said, what we're going to do is we're going to collect every single diary of any type, any period, any language, any country from now on, aren't we? And then I clicked back the safety catch and he said, okay, fine. So he signed here, and that's what we do. We have a Catholic interest in anything which is a diary. And this is its strength, because we have a cross-section of the widest kind of real persons' real lives. Now, there's many reasons why it is so urgent. The blog on the internet, the blog is the enemy of diaries, because many people think that people used to keep diaries and now they keep a blog. But the contrast between them in function is huge, because when you wrote a diary, technically speaking, nobody was ever supposed to read it except you. That is the basic principle. So whatever the reason for doing it, writing in pencil or ink like a normal inscription, the principle was that no one, you weren't expecting anybody to read it, and sometimes you'd die if anybody read it. It would be absolutely mortifying. But that is an intrinsic thing about diaries. They're not written for others' eyes, whereas a blog is just the opposite. So a good blogger will say, got out of bed this morning, noticed my sheets were a little stained, perhaps I ought to put them in the washing machine, and that goes all round the world. And then people say, You know, that's a funny thing. Mine were a bit grubby last week, but we washed them and then we hung them in the garden and now they're as good as new. And you have this kind of fatuity masquerading as thought and communication all over the internet. It's worthless in comparison with a notebook written on the top step of a house, going to bed with a lady in her nightie and her slippers, writing about what happened during the day. Because you have a narrative seen through one pair of eyes and one experience level, which evolves. I mean, if you have sometimes 76 diaries of one person, it's absolutely extraordinary. And if you read diaries like this, it means reading fiction of the kind that you might read for distraction becomes rather dull, because a really good novelist will get you into the book so that you can't escape until you finished it. But this is a very rare quality. But with a diary, it happens whatever you choose. You only have to read a few pages, and then there's a miscarriage, and it's unbearable. And what's Auntie so and so going to say? You know, because you're already in there, it's sort of like hanging from the ceiling and watching what's going on. So you have these resources which are written by a wide cross section of persons. With for some reason, and why they do it is very complicated, but they do it. So when a person dies, I mean, I have an example of a long run an old man on his last afternoon was writing his diary, and he wrote, "I really don't feel all that well today. I think I might," and then there's a of the pen, and that's it. He must have died writing his diary. And the first one, he was about 6. So the whole of his life is there. The whole of his life. And it is a testimony like no other. And I tell you, the true importance of it is that most diaries are what I did today. What happened to me today? Some are, who am I? Am I an artist? Do I believe in God? Am I an adulterer? There's a lot of flagellation and self-pity, in diaries, but the basic diary is what happened to me today. And when people write that, they always tell the truth. They don't doctor it up. They don't twist it. So, for example, you have voices, when you have enough diaries, throughout the 20th century, all over the country, you have people's just brief record of what they did, as if writing for a newspaper, as if writing for some other reader, whoever it is. They don't tell a fib. They don't lie. I mean, if they, someone said, I didn't pay my bus fare today. I should have done, but the conductor didn't come, and I didn't actually, and I've still got this 1 shilling and sixpence in my pocket, and I feel really bad about it. And what am I going to do? You know, things, very small things, sometimes become a matter for discussion. But the most important thing is that when people say what happened to them and what they thought about it, they don't adjust the text with an agenda to convince another reader. And this is the most significant thing, because in my personal opinion, all other writing has an agenda. So if you take correspondence, letter writing, no question about it. No question about it. You know, dear Auntie Helen, thank you for my lovely birthday present. I was really happy to have that book. And what the letter really means is, I don't think you should come back to our house, because my father is always in a bad temper when you come to stay. And as for that book, this is the 3rd time you've given it to me, once when I was 7, once when I was 16, and now I'm 24, and you're still giving me the same book. And it isn't any good anyway, so leave me alone, is what the letter really means. And if you take that standing point, all journalism, for example, all reporting of any kind, all things written for law, testimony statements, tax returns, they are all written with an agenda of one kind or another. And I can't think of a single kind of writing which is free of agendas. except diaries. So if you have a small diary that says, went to the dentist, have to get a new bicycle pump, have this, cut the lawn, of course there's no fibbing there. They're not telling any lies, they're just not telling you very much. But long narratives about it, and sometimes with the balloon, oh, I meant to say I did it, and sometimes it's a really big messy thing, because no one's going to come and say, this is very messy writing, this is the best you can do. Nobody does. And they record stuff, as if they all have a conception that somebody one day is going to want to read what they've written and appreciate it, but not worship them. They don't try to make the reader think, oh, what a lovely old lady she must have been, or something like that. It doesn't apply. So that's the significance of it. So I think, I don't know how embedded in Polish culture, I mean, there's been so much trouble for personal property and writings and manuscripts. I have no idea whether, if one started to think about making a noise to see if anyone's got any diaries from before, or even, I mean, very recent, it doesn't matter, and they didn't want them, they might start a library of scientific nature. Beautiful institution of this kind could probably find a small shelf where you'd start doing it, because the thing about it is that once you have them rescued, you can never predict what their value will be to different kinds of examination, and certainly in the future. I mean, I often think this, that if you have a diary, I have many such diaries, I got up, saw Mrs. So-and-so, had a cup of tea, went to the shop, bought some vegetables, potatoes are so expensive this week, diddly diddly, you know, all this kind of stuff, wash my hair, like that. You think no one in the world would be interested in this, but it is really interesting. And if you had a diary like that written in 1596, and the diary said, got up and the horse had cast a shoe, I'll have to go to the cobbler again, another expense, and the wife's in a bad temper with a runny nose, and it was written in 1564, you would be electrified by the fact that, my God, this is centuries and centuries ago, and here they are doing the same thing. And that is the point, because what drives me is that man in ancient Mesopotamia, 3000 BC and so forth, when we have writing, and man in the Victorian period, and the Romans, and in the 19th century, and they are all the same animal. They are all the same animal. And this is something that historians never tell you, and archaeologists never tell you. Nobody dares to say this, but in my opinion, it is a crucial matter that Homo sapiens is unchanged since the beginning of the archaeological record, and therefore anything which comes to a modern reader with their white gloves and special glasses and a lamp, and they start to read this diary, it's all very well doing it for the handwriting and for the history, but also it hits them that there was somebody who had to do the washing up in 1927 when they didn't feel like it. And I know exactly what that's like, because I often have to, after a party, you have to do the washing up, and you don't really feel, and you suddenly get a flash of cross humanity out of a small inky notebook with you in your daily life. This is a remarkable thing, and it happens on a deep level, and of course to do with beauty and love and the joy of children, all those sorts of things which are big and obvious and in all poetry and literature. But in diaries, they have a sort of special small place. And when you find someone giving a wedding anniversary present when they've been married for 73 years and they haven't got much money and they got this small present, and you think suddenly that if they'd been married for 73 years and this diary was written in 1911, then when did they get married? Then when were they born? And all of a sudden, the telescope of the past opens up. It doesn't shrink, it opens up. So I think diaries have 100 different kinds of importance. So that's why we did it. And we don't buy them much. Right at the beginning, I used to go and buy diaries off the internet where I could. And then I suddenly realized I wasn't collecting them like a collector. I was trying to rescue them. So if people are going to buy them, they're not going to throw them away. So we don't do that anymore, but we advertise that we will accept and look after diaries for the future in proper conditions and things like that, proper boxes, and they come all the time. They come all the time. It's marvellous, really very interesting. And of course, during lockdown, it's a very funny thing for the diary person, because during lockdown, people were stuck in their houses for such a long time that eventually they even thought they'd tidy up. And then they go in the loft and see what was in the loft, and in the cupboards they never opened. And quite a lot of people found old diaries, and quite a lot of people telephoned the project and said, we've got some diaries for you. So that's a rather extraordinary, interesting thing. So I think that all literary cultures of the world, if diaries to some extent or another are part of their heritage, should really take seriously the rescue of them before it's too late, because I don't think people will be keeping diaries in the traditional way forever, because the internet is a major, major drain, and also the traditions in which it flourished are different. It was a very English educated thing to do, and the sort of family principles where those things were regarded as important are not so universal anymore. So I don't know, it'd be interesting to go to a stationer's shop in December and see if they have a whole range of new pocket diaries. I mean, they have organisers, they call them organisers, and things to keep an account of your finances, but that's not quite the same thing as what used to sometimes happen, that people wrote things like this, got home from work and made some tea, went in the garden, and I saw God. And you read this in the diary, your hair stands on end. You think, what the hell was that? And they don't say, God was surprisingly short and fat, and there was a button missing on his shirt or anything like that. But some extreme moment of religious response hit them, and they didn't describe it because they'd never forget it. But that sort of record is quite remarkable and not uncommon. Well, you have to come and see it. Actually, you have to come and see it. It is remarkable. So we have in total at the moment about 12,000 diaries, and they are available to people to come and read. And sometimes we're very careful about how we accept them. So if somebody has their own diaries which they would like to give, but they don't want anybody else to read them for 30 years because they're full of I hate so-and-so and I'm going to murder so-and-so and things like that. So we have an arrangement that the diaries can be taken and they are under lock and key for the specified time, and no one will touch them until. So what I like about this library is that all the rules imply that the world will just go on forever. No nuclear fission, no floods of London, no end of the planet. Everybody knows about all those things, but in the library, and this is one of the things about libraries, because they operate on a different level to the news. So we tell people that we're very happy to look after these diaries and that no one will look at them for 30 years. And then, if that's fine by you, then they will be removed from this tie and put in the general collection, and an entry about them will be put in the running catalogue, and they will be part of the resource. So, I mean, if you think 30 years on, it's quite a while, and we can do it for longer if necessary. And nobody says, oh, I don't believe you, or, well, I won't be here in 30 years and I don't think you will either. And we don't have those conversations. It's which you might expect. If you went to a garage, people make those sorts of remarks. But in the library, there is an agreement that the important things of life will survive forever and ever. And I find that a very stimulating atmosphere. I think it is true. I feel strongly that, I mean, I've written books for children, which are for children, and I've written books for adults, and I've written some in between. And this worries my agent a lot, and it worries bookshops because they don't know where things belong. But my conviction is what you describe, that writing for children and writing for adults is only really, only differs in the complexity of the vocabulary, the length of the sentences, and perhaps the allusions to things which children wouldn't necessarily know. Those three features make it different. But the thing is this, I wrote a book once for children, which was published by a major London publisher, and I had fights with them every 5 minutes about the vocabulary. And I said, okay, what is going on? I write this book. I have 5 children. I came from a very literary family. All my sisters have read all of English literature, and so have I. And we love books and we care about the language. And what's wrong with you? What's wrong with my vocabulary? And this is what they said, that in this country, we educationalists, our view is that a book for a child of a given age should only contain vocabulary that they already know. That was their commercial rule. That 7 to 9-year-olds, you can have 7 to 9-year-old vocabulary, but 10-year-old, no way. So A, they completely sacrifice the conception that children learn vocabulary from books. This seems to me self-evident, because when you read, if you have any intelligence at all, and you come upon a word that you don't happen to know, A, the context usually tells you more or less what it means. Sometimes it's related to another word that you know. All sorts of things operate. So it's not often that you're reading, even if you're a sleepy 10-year-old, reading a story with a word you've got absolutely no idea what it means, and it's crucial for the sentence. It doesn't work that way. Because when children come out of the womb, they have a kind of vacuum suction pump for words. And how do they learn words? Because they hear them. And how does it work? Because when they hear a word they don't know, it goes in there and the brain says, hammer, what is that? Hammer, hammer, hammer. And then you hear the word chisel, what's a chisel? Then you see your grandfather and you hear that sound, ah! So hammer is fixed forever. And all the other tools are things like hammers. And you learn vocabulary, and a normal child learns vocabulary voraciously. And it should be the same with books. You don't have to go from a 7-year-old book to something like Dostoevsky. But what you do have to do is to write unself-consciously with the natural vocabulary that fits the story. This is the solution to me. If you write the book with the right vocabulary and the right style of English for the story according to you, then that should be enough. And any kid who reads it, and also if it's a really good book, they often read it several times. I had a book called Eric and what was it called? Eric and the Detectives, something like that, translated from a German book by Kestner. I don't know why I like that book so much. It was a good adventure. I read it, I don't know how many times. And also, publishers and booksellers, they don't have any idea what they're dealing with. For example, when I was a kid, and I know a lot of kids who do this, when they got a book from the library, they, by an author they liked and they wanted to read the story, they'd open it and read it from then on. And I have a conviction that people who start chapter 1, word 1, and go all the way through to the end, full stop, finis, are very, very unusual. So the nature of a book is a complex thing, because a book is always written as if it's a linear thing where you could never get through page 3 if you jumped the first 2 pages, things like that. So, but kids don't ever, because it's like being at school. You see, this is the other thing about writing for children. It can't have any smell of school about it, because if it does, they don't actually recoil, but you can see they turn off. Because a book which is didactic or instructive or clearly written has all those things to do with school. And I'm this thing about vocabulary and age groups, it drives me insane. Every time I think of it, it makes me really angry, because it's the complete opposite of the truth. And in our family, kids read books, someone said, "Daddy, what does this mean?" And you tell them. and then next day they're using this word unselfconsciously in another sentence. If you look something up on the internet, and when you're doing your homework, then 4 minutes later you won't remember it anyway, because there's no contact, there's no thinking about it. So I disagree with it. So I think books, theoretically, a new book for children, which you'd expect them to enjoy, should be slightly too difficult. Slightly. Not overwhelmingly, because then it is off-putting. Because if you try to read a book, an adult book written by an adult for an adult, which is not well written, it's very hard work anyway. I mean, there's a skill to writing lucidly, non-repetitively, with clarity, to seduce the reader to follow you, and that principle applies with all writing, and it's just the weight of vocabulary. So I feel strongly about it.
Thank you very much.
It's a big pleasure for me. Thank you. Thank you.